Shalom lekulam. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the latest in our series that we're doing here in collaboration with the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. As I've had to say for the two previous installments, we are, of course, talking about the topics that we wanted to talk about initially, but inevitably we will be also covering the current situation, the war that Israel is engaged in with Hamas, and the same goes for our discussion lecture this evening. We will hear from our guest on his main topic, and when it comes to questions, he'll be happy to answer questions not just about his presentation, but also broader questions about the current situation. You'll hear from his bio that I'm about to read that he is eminently qualified to address those questions as well. So after his presentation and a few follow-up questions from myself, we'll go to questions from the audience, from you listening in here on the Zoom. You can write those questions into the chat at the bottom of your screen, and I will put some of those questions to our guest. So we have with us, and it's our great privilege to have with us, Dr. Eran Lerman, who's a former Deputy Director for Foreign Policy and International Affairs at the National Security Council in the Israeli Prime Minister's office. He's held senior posts in IDF military intelligence for over 20 years. He also served for 8 years as director of the Israel and Middle East office of the American Jewish Committee. He currently teaches in the Middle East Studies program at Shalem College in Jerusalem and in postgraduate programs at Tel Aviv University and the National Defense College. He's an expert on Israel's foreign relations and the Middle East. He's a third-generation Sabra. He has a PhD from the London School of Economics. You'll hear his wonderful British accent pretty soon, and a Master's of Public Administration from Harvard. Dr. Eran Lerman, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I should actually mention that at Shalem College, we were about to launch on the 10th of October, the new department that I helped put together, a strategy, diplomacy, and security. Originally, I wanted to call it strategy, diplomacy, and war. And people said, war, that's getting out of fashion, Yuval Noah Harari told us this is not going to be part of the 21st century. Well, tough luck. We may have it back on the title. But anyway, if you have young people who are planning to study that Shalem offers a very interesting perspective now. It's a new department, unlike any that I know anywhere, and very much relevant to what we are going through right now. My subject is not trivial to the war we're in for several reasons that I'll mention. It is not central as we face Hamas, as we face the Iranian camp of resistance, axis of resistance. And that certainly is the core set of questions that we face. But we learned a few things since October 7 about our place in the world. And for some time, I've been arguing that we should really think about ourselves, maybe also about the future that we would create in Gaza after Hamas is gone. Not so much in terms of the Middle East, which is what everybody is used to say, but in terms of Israel as an Eastern Mediterranean country. And I will explain why. But what we did learn very quickly after the atrocities of October 7 is that our hopes for a rapprochement with Erdogan's Turkey were badly misplaced, whereas what I've been arguing for some time, namely that Israel should increasingly align itself, maybe not an alliance, but an alignment with Cyprus and Greece, and think of itself in Eastern Mediterranean terms proved to be very important for things that we don't often stop and think about, namely our strategic and logistical depth. Once shipping lines and airlines are scared away by conflict, it's our carriers that need to do much of the traffic. And having friendly countries within a short hop away from Israel makes it possible for El Al and our cargo flights and our shipping and SIM and the carriers that the government actually can oblige to serve under duress, because they have what they call the golden stake in these companies. They can ask them to do certain things in an emergency. They can serve us via Greece and via Cyprus as our logistical backstop. And so that proved itself to be quite important in the conflict so far, because there are, as you know, many who find it who found it difficult to get here, and the question of supply remains open. And so this relationship, it has been built over the last 10 years, and I'll tell you why and how, proved itself at the test of a real emergency. Whereas Turkey's position, at least with as long as Erdogan is in power, the moment things started going as they did, the AKP, the ruling party, and Erdogan himself, not to mention his even more hostile and radical allies of the Nationalist Party, the MHP, basically took once again an extremely hostile position, the kind of language that we remember from the Mavi Marmara crisis 2010, or even worse. So the basic reasons that drove the emergence of the Israeli-Mediterranean alignment over the last 10 years are even more evident now as a result of the war. But let me roll back to where it all begins. Historically, we were on the other side of the divide. Turkey was our friend, for reasons having to do with its enmity with Assad's Syria, with Saddam's Iraq, and with the Iranian regime. Secular Turkey, dominated, as we knew, by the military, was basically friendly and open to Israeli influence. And we were selling them arms, we were training in Turkish territory. We saw ourselves quite close. Whereas the Cypriots were under the influence of their Arab neighbors, and Greece, in the days of Andreas Papandreou, the socialist prime minister in the 1980s, was almost, some people said, the extra member of the Arab League. How come we've gone so far in the opposite, the pendulum swung so far in the opposite direction over the last 10 years, and created what has become a significant alignment of forces? I assume you're aware that within 2 weeks of the outbreak of violence, the president of Cyprus, Nikos Christodoulidis, on October 21st, and then the Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, came 2 days later, both of them expressing commitment, support, friendship towards Israel at its, as we are saying now, at the dark hour in our history. And how did we come to that point? what has transformed the relationships. And I used to say that there are, basically over the last 10 years, we've seen the emergence of 10 E reasons, all of them, or 8 E reasons, all of them beginning with the letter E. So it's a nice mnemonic trick, but actually tells you the story. What brings us together, what keeps us together. And paradoxically, but it's tied up also with some of the most important dynamics of the present war. The first reason was Egypt. You may remember in 2013, when Sisi, as Minister of Defense, head of the military establishment, basically overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood regime in Egypt, and President Mohamed Morsi. There were people in Europe, in Brussels, who were shocked. A democratically elected president was removed. But then he was, let's remember, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, also were elected in 2006, and we know what they stand for and how really democratic that movement is and was. The Greeks, on the other hand, and the Cypriots, were very much at the same boat with us at the time. They saw the Muslim Brotherhood as a threat. They saw the alignment of Erdogan's AKP, the Islamist party that now rules Turkey, with the Muslim Brotherhood elements in the Arab world as an extremely dangerous development. They were delighted, elated that Morsi was overthrown, and that essentially generated a commonality of perspectives between Israel, Nicosia, and Athens. I actually remember the visit in Israel of the foreign minister of the very, very left-wing Greek government at the time, the Syriza, were in power. That's a young man, a person who, as a young man, was in jail as a communist under the colonel's regime in Greece. And I was present, and he says to Netanyahu, nobody will suspect me of having any sympathy towards a junta, but Brussels is wrong about Sisi. That was the Greek sentiment, that was the Cypriot sentiment, and it generated a basis of commonality that evolved into a dialogue, actually a structure of dialogue that was and continues to be exemplified by tripartite summit meetings, 2 parallel sets of tripartite summit meetings. The Prime Minister of Israel, in 8 out of 9 cases, it was Netanyahu, and the Prime Ministers of Greece, Prime Minister of Greece. Greece, like Israel, has a symbolic president and an executive prime minister, and the president of Cyprus. So Cyprus has a presidential system. The president is the chief executive of the country. And these summits, we've been through 9 of these, and in parallel, since 2014, and in parallel, they've built the same system of tripartite meetings with Sisi, with the Egyptians. So basically, you have 2 triangles. I mean, I say we Jews know what to do with 2 triangles. But these 2 interconnected triangles essentially generated what I call not an alliance, but an alignment. And so the first E in this story is Egypt. That was the trigger. The need to treat the new regime in Egypt differently than Europe did. Very quickly, of course, the obvious other E is Erdogan. Erdogan with his neo-Ottoman ambitions, with his references to Islamic and Islamist ambitions and traditions. You remember that when he inaugurated the use of the Hagia Sophia church, which was an archaeological site under the secular regime of Ataturk and the Kemalist successors, and now Erdogan is re-Islamizing Turkey. So when he did this, he also mentioned that he is also going one day to do the same, to liberate also Al-Aqsa. So you get the general sense of where he's coming from. Memory reminded us some time ago that when he was still a young teacher, he used to put together plays with his students about the dark conspiracies of the Komaya, communist Yahud, the Jews, and the Masons, Masonics. So you get the general idea of where he's coming from, where his attitudes were bred and nurtured. And we certainly share the extreme suspicion with which he has been viewed and continues to be viewed by the Greeks and the Cypriots. We have actually a practical issue to be resolved, because the Turks believe that the Eastern Mediterranean EEZ borders, that's perhaps the number 9E, EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone, creates a border between them and Libya. How they manage to do this? By ignoring the fact that Crete and Carpathos and Rhodes are actually Greek islands. So they actually draw the Mediterranean as if they can carve a corridor to Libya, which means that Israel, Cyprus, and Egypt would be blocked from having an EEZ access to Europe, to Greece, and hence to Europe. And of course, the Greeks draw the map in a very different way that gives Egypt and Greece a common border. So Erdogan's ambitions and Erdogan's interference, particularly in Libya, and its subversion against Egypt and so on, all of these made him a common enemy of Egypt, certainly, but also of Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. Now, the third element, obviously, is energy. Before this war began, the Turks were trying to angle for Israel to export its energy via Turkey. Bad idea, because actually when you, even if you are the exporter and they are the, let's say, the carrier, you are dependent on them rather than they on us. We would be dependent on their outlet to the world rather than us, they being dependent on Israel as a source. So we need to continue to think of Egypt and Cyprus as the potential venues for Israeli exports. The idea of a pipeline that goes all the way deep into the Mediterranean and over into Greece may be overambitious unless oil and gas prices go through the roof. But the idea of, for example, building an LNG facility in Cyprus for our gas and their gas to be marketed all over by ship may actually be the best solution. So energy links us together. In recent years, I would add to this list exercises. Israeli Air Force flies to Greece to train, and our commando forces go to Cyprus to train. And if we are going one day, maybe one day soon, to have to fight Hezbollah in the high Lebanon, they have been training for this kind of scenario in the Troodos Mountains, in the higher part of the Troodos Mountains in Cyprus. That's never done before in our history, that significant units of our ground forces went to train in a foreign country. And that's been going on for a number of years, and everyone knows that this is a Lebanese scenario, of course. Until Hamas struck, the working assumption in Israel was that the next major war will be with Hezbollah. May still be true. but the Cypriots would volunteer to lend their landscape for a simulation of the Lebanese situation for our forces to train for, is unprecedented in all our relationships with friends anywhere, to the best of my memory. Add to this response in emergency. We've seen now a man-made emergency in which they were very, very significant, but also us responding to fires in Greece and Cyprus. The Cypriots and the Greeks were the first to come here on the Carmel fire, and we built on that down the road. And we have here's another E. We have environmental concerns that we share in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have aspects of economic development, and an important E, Europe, for us, is an arena where we often face very unpleasant attitudes from Belgians, as we've seen now, from the Irish, God bless them, and used to be the Swedes, although they've softened up recently. I've just published at the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune a survey of a shift, slightly better position in Sweden. But basically, in Europe, you have voices with unpleasant designs towards Israel, and having two aligned friends, not, as I said, I don't use the term allies because we don't want to commit ourselves to fight on the Greek front one day, but we are aligned together, and that certainly will give us the possibility of learning in advance what's cooking against us. And since Europe normally decides by consensus, we actually can trip up with the help of friends, such designs. They are not our only friends in the EU as it is now. The Czech Republic, the Germans, the Austrians, it's unbelievable how well they've reacted to this crisis. But it's still useful to have the Greek and Cypriot alliance. And of course, if even the far left in Greece took up the Israeli friendship project, certainly so does the present right of center government under Kyriakos Mitsotakis, who basically brought the relationship even further up. So that's basically the story. And just to put a final line on it, the title is "Where Are We in the World?" And my answer is in the Eastern Mediterranean, rather than the Middle East. In essence, the term Middle East is a British colonial relic. Why are we in the Middle East? By the way, originally we were in the Near East. Absurdly, in the American State Department, this is still the term they use, the NEA, the Near East and the African Department. Near East, I think the nearest east to DC is in Bermuda, not here. But they inherited the British ordering of the world. And so there was the Near East, and there was originally the Middle East meant Iraq and Iran, or as they used to call it, Mesopotamia and Persia. And then comes the big Far East. And in the Anglo-Japanese Treaty of 1904, there is also the extreme East. That's Japan and Korea. One more step and you fall off altogether. So it's there are all kinds of degrees of East. When the center of the world is London, well, tough luck, it isn't. And go tell the Chinese that anything is not center, because the name of China in Chinese is the center of the world. That's what China means in Chinese. Zhongguo, center country. But we, I think, can release ourselves from the hold of this perception, whereas the Mediterranean is not a term of reference, it is a physical object. You can go and swim in it. And it brings us together with Greece, with Cyprus, to a certain important degree with Egypt, with all the tensions and complexities. Much of what we are doing towards Gaza now, including the facilitation of the move from north to south, enabling the IDF to fight in the north, is done with the Egyptians' complicity, including Israeli, some degree at least of Israeli control over what's going on from Egypt into Gaza. And also, let's remember that when we sent warships, missile boats to the Red Sea, they did not go around the Cape of Good Hope. So the Egyptians appreciate and understand the importance of Israel in this alignment. And all of this lends a very different, let's say, level of importance in light of the war to our place in the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay, let's open this for questions on this or on any related subject that people want to relate to.
Okay, so I will get to some of the questions that have already come in from our audience shortly. Just a couple of questions from me. You mentioned that prior to October 7th, there was the start of a rapprochement with Turkey. Can you say a little bit, firstly, about how that came about? What explains Erdogan's change of heart, or well, not real change of heart, but realpolitik change of heart, shall we say? And also, in your assessment, we can look at it now in retrospect and see obviously his reaction to October 7th. But do you think, generally speaking, it's an indication that Israel should be a little more, I think this maybe also applies to Qatar and the whole treatment of Hamas over recent years, but that Israel should be more circumspect about the ideologies, the underlying ideologies of the regimes that it's dealing with, and maybe a little less inclined to go with a sort of pragmatic, short-term realpolitik approach?
Well, let's break this into two aspects. First of all, Erdogan found himself facing the near ruin of the Turkish economy. The Turkish pound was going spiraling down, and he and his relations with Washington became increasingly rocky, and he needed, basically what he needed was not a rapprochement with Israel, although we matter economically. We used to be a good export market. We retained our economic relationship. We still retain it even now. We still buy agricultural products and other products from Turkey. I hope there will be public pressure away from that, but it's still there. But what he really needed was Saudi and Emirati money, investment, shoring up the Turkish pound, etc., the lira. And paradoxically, almost against our traditional intuitions, to be a friend of the Emiratis and of the Saudis, you actually had to reconcile with Egypt and with Israel to tone down the hostility towards Sisi and towards Israel, and essentially move away from the instinctive support for the Muslim Brotherhood and its offshoots like Hamas, which was the mark of his policy until recently. So that's essentially this is what he was trying to do. He invited Herzog for a good visit. Netanyahu was scheduled to go there. There was a sense that he was basically trying to court what I call the camp of stability, and to reduce the level of friction between the Muslim Brotherhood camp, that's Turkey and Qatar and Hamas, with the camp of stability. But the lesson is not that we should suspect all pragmatics. We should suspect those who hide a commitment to Islamist ideology, although a Fabian one, like the Brotherhood. They are not Al-Qaeda or that need a revolution now, but they are still essentially what we call in good Hebrew, it's Zev Borke, wolves in sheep's clothing, and basically they and the Qataris remain committed to a worldview that's rooted in the Muslim Brotherhood and similar ideas that Erdogan is promoting. So we should have remained on our guard. We should have remained suspicious. Whereas, for example, the Emiratis and to some extent the Saudis, certainly the Egyptians, come from a very different ideological perspective. They are committed to fight the Islamist element to the best of their ability. So there, on that basis, we actually belong to a larger camp in the region.
Yeah.
We have tensions with elements of that camp, but we belong to it anyway.
Right. Okay, so I did have another question, but there's so many questions coming in that I want to be fair to our audience, and I'll turn to those questions instead. There's a couple of questions regarding Turkey and also Turkish Cyprus. So I'm going to just combine a couple here. One is that whether Greece, someone, let me just find it here. Sharon asks whether Greece and Cyprus are big enough economies or sophisticated enough militaries to be relevant against Turkey. And there are a couple of questions about whether the existence of Turkish Cyprus, northern occupied Cyprus, whether that is maybe problematic in terms of us conducting military exercises in Cyprus. Is it a security problem? Could it cause tensions, greater tensions with Turkey because of that?
I'll start with the latter. We've done it already more than once. And the Turks essentially, until then, shrugged it off. What if that would happen again now is an interesting question. That they may actually put pressure on Greek Cyprus, as they call it, to call it off. But the northern part of Cyprus is a paradoxical case because its original inhabitants would love nothing more than to bring the question to solution in a manner that stops the Turkish occupation and the steady resettlement of northern Cyprus by poor Turks from the Anatolian highlands, with whom they dislike. That's I think a mild term. They are even bringing in Muslims from Syria and whatever. The original elite of northern Cyprus is deeply troubled, and I wish there would be a quick solution to the problem that brings Cyprus together again, to some extent, under some kind of a federal or confederal arrangement. Instead, what we are seeing is increasingly Turkish occupation becoming the actual reality, with the fiction of the TRNC, as if it's an independent republic, becoming less and less real. And so it certainly is the Cyprus question, which makes Cyprus and Greece very concerned about Turkey and drives them to greater cooperation with Israel. Of course, the Cypriot military and the Cypriot economy is negligible in terms of its direct contribution. The Greek military is quite formidable. They have a good air force, and they will fight. But we are not going to get into a shooting war with Turkey, one way or the other. What we can do is help them in intelligence, in equipment, at the political arena internationally, particularly in Washington. And that's enough to make them appreciate what we have to offer. In terms of the economy, it's the other way around. It's not that Israel needs Cyprus, it's that Israel's economic imprint on a country less than 10% our population and much less than 10% Israeli economy can make us a very significant player in Cypriot terms and give us leverage in building up the alignment.
Okay, interesting question here from Jeff Daub, who asks, while more a part of the central Mediterranean, why shouldn't Italy or even Kosovo be included in such an alignment?
Well, Kosovo, of course, has its own concerns, but it's the most friendly Muslim country I know, side by side with Azerbaijan. But the Azeris barely opened an embassy in Israel. The Kosovars have an embassy in Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, yes.
Which is remarkable and very friendly, and I've met them more than once. Very friendly people. But Kosovo is not a Mediterranean country. It has, as such, it's landlocked, and its influence in the Balkan is limited. But certainly, it is a country we should think actually further up the Adriatic. We also should also, despite our bitter history in the days of World War II, think of Croatia as a friend, Montenegro to some extent. Albania has been certainly a friend, despite being a Muslim majority country. And I certainly think of Italy as part of the larger alignment, certainly under its present management, or basically, if it's not in the hands of the buffoons from the Five-Star Movement, Italy is very much like-minded when it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean, and I think we should basically, I used to say we should basically think of it as a 3+3 proposition. Italy, Greece, and Cyprus on the European side, Israel, Egypt, and Jordan on the our side of the Mediterranean. And in fact, such an organization actually exists. People are no longer paying attention, but there is an organization called the EMGF, the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. For political reasons, we've added the Palestinian Authority, so it's 3+3 plus something which is not actually one. But basically, it is a forum that meets in Cairo in the presence of the Israeli Minister of Energy on a regular basis. You may recall that when in the previous government, Karine El-Harrar went there, and Sisi made a show of actually walking right to her in her wheelchair. That was a gentlemanly act, but it was also a political act. So Italy is, and by the way, France has joined the EMGF, and the United States is an observer. When the Emiratis wanted to join, and the Emiratis are deeply invested in the Eastern Mediterranean because of their dislike of Erdogan, the Palestinians tripped them up, which is fairly incredible. But EMGF is an interesting institution. If anyone told me 15 years ago, 10 years ago, that we would be in an equal and influential member in an organization that sits in Cairo and reflects Eastern Mediterranean interests, I would have doubted the prospect, but it happened in 2019.
Okay, that's really interesting information. I think many of us, perhaps most of us, were not aware of that. Okay, there's a question here. We're now going to branch out a little to our current situation here. Shmuel Yerushalmi asked for your views on the increased risk of war between Israel and, he lists, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. Obviously, Yemen is in the picture now because of the rockets from the Houthi regime.
Well, it's not Yemen; it's the Houthi regime in
Houthi regime, right?
Holding parts of Yemen. I think we don't recognize them as the legitimate government of Yemen. Neither do our friends in the Gulf. But I doubt very much if we are going to come to war. It's a bit difficult for us to go and conquer Yemen. The Saudis tried, by the way, in a long and bitter and murderous war and did not do too well despite their excellent American equipment. But we can certainly sting them back. They've done us no harm so far. They tried, but didn't. The one piece of that fell in Eilat did not actually come from them; came from Syria. With Syria, but we could certainly, I think it would be appropriate for Israel at the appropriate time to do something that will indicate to the Houthis that what they've done has a price tag. But a war with Yemen, with the Houthi regime in Sana'a is a bit beyond our direct range of possibilities. We can protect ourselves well and sting them back. As for Syria, well, there are militias who are being drawn into launching here and there against us. I think that the Assad himself is very wary about all-out confrontation with Israel. If the regime is badly mauled in a fight with Israel, the likelihood that they will pay for it with their lives, because the Syrian people have not yet forgotten what was done to them since 2011, is really enough for Assad to be very cautious. I know enough about him to say with some confidence that he understands the discrepancy of power between Israel and the badly eroded Syrian military. And so I think as far as he is concerned, and with the Russians whispering in his ear not to be dragged by the Iranians into the abyss, because the Russians have no wish to lose what they've gained in Syria since 2015, I think he would stay this side of caution.
Right.
In Lebanon, we have a very complicated situation because it could deteriorate. And it is also ultimately a decision we need to make, whether we want to allow people to continue to live next to Hezbollah-dominated border with the Radwan force, which is far more trained and prepared for missions than the Nokhba that attacked us on October 7th. So this is, I would say, something that for us is a decision to make. But Hassan Nasrallah, what he's doing is basically keep the big pot on the boil, but just short of an all-out explosion. And there are, I would say very quickly, 4 reasons for that. One is that Lebanon itself as a country is so fragile and so anxious to avoid a destructive war that he is operating in a very hostile environment within the Lebanese people. And Prime Minister Mikati said this out loud. But the reason the president of Lebanon did not speak out is that Lebanon is now for a whole year without a president, since Michel Aoun ended his term of office, and there's been no elected president in Lebanon. Lebanon is in chaos, economic decline of the worst kind, the collapse of infrastructure. We saw the catastrophe in August 20 in the port of Beirut. The idea that Hezbollah would bring them further down into the abyss is not popular, maybe not even with the Shia. So that's one. The second is that the IDF is now in full mobilization and ready for a northern campaign, and they know it. The window of opportunity for them to launch something dramatic and surprise us has gone. It's closed on them. One thing, and the third point, and that helped close the gap between, say, midday on October 7 and the day after, when the IDF was already coming under full mobilization, was the American posture. Not trivial, not trivial. Gerald R. Ford alone carries the equivalent of a quarter of the Israeli Air Force, more or less. and is accompanied by an Aegis cruiser, which with the capacity to shoot down much of the missile barrages that Hezbollah could launch. So it's not, they can talk bravely about the Americans, but talk is cheap. And finally, the fourth point, in addition to the situation in Lebanon, the IDF mobilization, the American presence, the fourth reason is that Hezbollah is a key Iranian asset for one purpose: to deter Israel from going after the Iranian nuclear capability. And if Hezbollah is thrown in and wasted just to save Hamas, then the Iranians would be short of one of their most important assets.
Right. So I mean that your answer about Lebanon in particular, I think, takes me on to a question about Iran, where Sharon asks whether what's happened what happened on October 7th, and I would add Iran's clear hand in everything that's going on, not just Hamas, but also, of course, the Houthis and Hezbollah. She writes, will the world and the USA now deal with Iran as her words, a genocidal terror engine, not to be treated, or I guess not just to be treated, as a diplomatic threat? That there should be something other than just economic sanctions, that the world, the United, led by the US, should be ramping up its military deterrence, I guess, on Iran.
Well, it's a tough question, because the Biden administration certainly did try very intensely to build a different relationship with Iran, to find a way to return to the JCPOA or improve the 2015 agreement that Obama negotiated with the Iranians to delay or stop the Iranian nuclear project. And all of this is now falling apart. There's been already 3 American airstrikes against Iranian targets or Iranian-related, IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or their allies in Syria. So the Americans are, since they are in alliance with us, I call it a hybrid alliance, in which they're not going to fight our ground battles for us, but they have provided deterrent cover for us. And in this situation, they are going, let me be very clear, they are going to influence our conduct in Gaza, but we have a way of influencing their perception of Iran. And as this shifts, the nuclear question may once again surface as an acute challenge, because the Iranians are getting closer. Under the cover of what's happening in Gaza, they are going further. So US action may at some point be called for, and I could not rule this out. Certainly if Hezbollah comes big way into the war, and the future of American credibility may come to hinge on whether or not Biden meant what he said when he said, don't.
Right. Yeah, not like one of Obama's red lines.
Yeah, well, I can make a case from an Israeli perspective that he made the right choice.
Oh, really? Okay.
In 2013, not going for the bombing, and instead negotiating the dismantlement of the Syrian chemical arsenal. For us, it was a better result than a half-hearted airstrike.
Okay. Just on the question of American deterrence.
But in terms of its impact on credibility, it left a very deep mark.
Yeah. So there's a couple of questions here on Lebanon, which I think are related and very interesting. Shulamit asks, I think this is a great point. Doesn't Nasrallah and Hezbollah, don't they win Keilu just by having tens of thousands of Israelis evacuated from the border? and refusing to return or unwilling or unable to return, isn't that by itself a great achievement for Hezbollah? Because it's not like the same thing is happening on the Lebanese side. We're not forcing the Lebanese to.
Actually, there has been quite a number of Lebanese.
Really? Okay. All right. So
Lebanese villages are not in any organized fashion, but basically going north, and then some of them began to return when they realized that Hassan Nasrallah's bravado is not actually leading to full-scale conflict.
Right. Let me just
going back to the Israelis. Yes, evacuate. Certainly, Hezbollah is saying it. It's saying it out loud and clear. Look at what we've achieved. We've managed to scare away all these Israelis. But in the IDF, when I was still a soldier, they used to say that at the end of every Shabbat there is Motzei Shabbat, and Hezbollah, the bill will be served at some point. I can increasingly find it very difficult to see a future in our region in which we are trying to stabilize the Palestinian situation, to build a very different proposition in Gaza, perhaps induce the Palestinians to replace their useless current leadership with something better. And all of this while Hezbollah is staring at us, at very close range. This whole thing doesn't compute. We need to deal with the threat one way or the other. We could try to get the international community to actually implement 1701, which is a joke now. UNIFIL proved over the years to be this kind of special umbrella that actually falls when it rains. So 15,000 people, and they've never caught a single Hezbollah anti-tank squad on its way to the front. And the number of missiles that Hezbollah has now is 10 times what they had in 2006. So an utter mathematical failure. Zero apprehensions, 10 times as many rockets, total mathematical collapse of what 1701 was supposed to be about.
Right. 1701, just for those for the
UN resolution that we used in order to terminate Second Lebanon War.
Second Lebanon War, yeah.
In August 2006.
Okay. Okay, there's a question. There was a question about Egypt, picking up on your comments about Egypt. There was a question from Lena who wanted to know just a little more about the current state of the Israel-Egyptian relationship. Well,
as they used to say, it's complicated. The personal relationship between Netanyahu and Sisi has not been warm or close, certainly not this year. And there are clearly elements of Israeli policy that worry many Egyptians. But at the professional level, soldiers and intelligence services, there's close coordination. I think it is what they call a New York Times revealed secret that Israel has actually been helping the Egyptians militarily by airstrikes, because we are very quick in closing sensor to shooter cycles. We help them with airstrikes at some points in the war against Daesh, ISIL, Islamic State in Iraq, and the Levant, which is actually spread to Sinai. They have what they call the Sinai province of Daesh. And it's an ongoing war. The Egyptian military is now doing better than it did 5 years ago. And this is all creating a commonality of interest. As I said, in the energy sector, Egypt has certainly voted to work closely with Israel in, for example, bringing Israeli gas through Egyptian LNG facilities to Europe, etc. So at the professional level, both military intelligence, but also economic energy, we know how to work together. and they may yet emerge as an instrumental in creating an alternative future for Gaza.
Very interesting. Okay. Sorry, that I said that question was from Lena. It was actually from Noam. Lena, however, did have an interesting question, which was about the Arab, well, it was originally supposed to be an Arab League summit in Riyadh. It turned out into a more expanded thing with the Organization of Islamic Conference. Yeah. So that was all the Muslim countries meeting in Riyadh last week, and she wanted your comments on the result of that summit.
Well, of course, there was a lot of anti-Israeli verbiage, as one might expect. De rigueur. There's no way they can all meet without the horrors that Israel is committing in Gaza being repeatedly condemned. But in terms of practical measures, bringing ambassadors back, cutting off relations, cutting off energy supplies, basically boycotting Israel once again, none of this was endorsed by unanimous vote. There were sufficient elements, Muslim and Arab, who were willing to stand up and trip this up. So the results were actually so shocking to the camp of resistance to Hamas and its allies that they described the summit as the summit of treason, khiyana. Exaggerated state, of course, term, of course, but it tells you that it didn't quite work out as the Iranians would have wanted it.
Okay, there's a lot of other questions here. Okay, just maybe we'll finish with this, which is taking us back to Turkey.
I can stay on a bit further if people wish.
So we'll go through some more questions, and people can leave if they wish at 9:30 or stay on if they wish as well. And this is being recorded, so you can also catch what you missed afterwards. Leon asks, does Erdogan's neo-Ottoman policy represent a permanent deviation from Kemalist Turkey?
Well, we were within inches of possible change in Turkey. The percentages were not huge in favor of Erdogan in the latest presidential election. Had there been someone there with more charisma than Kilic Daroglu, frankly, I can hardly think of anyone with less charisma than Kilic Daroglu. Things could have reverted to governance by the Kemalist traditions, which are still supported, if you look at the electoral map, are still supported by Istanbul, by Ankara, by the Western seaboard, the Aegean seaboard, the touristic centers down south. The bulk of Erdogan's voters comes from the Anatolian highlands and the very traditionalist elements of Turkish society. But there's nothing irreversible as yet, unless, of course, he erodes democracy even further and basically subjugates or suppresses the Kemalist tradition. But for the time being, it's there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that the election showing was particularly notable given how much Erdogan has weighted things in his favor. In it's not, these were not fair elections in any way that we would.
Yeah, he certainly played it in
terms of media and other things. Okay. So here's a question which I think has been asked of your colleagues in the JISS on the previous ones as well. Now it's, I think, perhaps even more pertinent, which is, how do you see the possible scenarios in Gaza after the war? And of course, I'm asking you this after it has been a topic of discussion in the Israeli press, with Netanyahu saying certain things and other people in the government saying different things, and the United States saying very different things from what's coming out of Israel. So what's your view?
Well, frankly, I can see I know where the sentiment comes from. I have not only friends, but family who would love to see Gaza turning into a large Israeli playground with Gush Katif rebuilt and Jewish Gaza retrieved from centuries ago. I'm afraid to disappoint, but Netanyahu has said as much, knowing that we're going to need the Americans for the long haul. This is not just about Gaza. This is about facing Iran. It's about facing Hezbollah. This is about basically trying to break the back of the so-called camp or axis of the Mukawama, of the resistance to our existence. We're not going to basically mobilize the whole world against us by trying to resettle Gaza. But military, a long transition phase in which, at least at first, it will be the IDF imposing its authority, seems to be by and large inevitable. Whether this will go by reversing directions and fighting in the south and sending the people once again to migrate north into safety and fighting to the end, or maybe some developments will break the back of Hamas resistance and the Egyptians would be drawn in. There are all kinds of immediate scenarios.
Yeah.
But down the road, I believe, I've been working on this together with my friend Bob Silverman, who's also a JISS contributor and a colleague of mine at Shalem College, former American diplomat who served at one point as the kind of civilian governor in Tikrit, in Saddam Hussein's own province in Iraq. So he knows a bit about these kind of institutions, and I'm looking at the larger picture. And basically what we've been thinking of is that a long transition towards self-governance or self-rule must have a force, a multinational presence in Gaza for a transitional period. And the source of authority the model of a source of authority for such an institution could be and should be the MFO in Sinai. That's to say, not the UN. The time the Soviets didn't want the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty to be recognized. So they tripped up the UN. And so the alternative was an American-Israeli-Egyptian committee managing this force and giving it its directives and orders. And something similar, a source of authority resting on Israel, Egypt, and United States could then recruit an effective gendarmerie to basically keep law and order, and a whole range of teams from around the world for actual reconstruction.
Wow. Okay, we will. This is a question the answer I think will be quite a long time in coming, but we will see.
But we need to start working on it yesterday, because the Americans otherwise will drag us into the rabbit hole, as President Netanyahu put it, of bringing Abu Mazen to Gaza. The man barely controls the corridor leading from his office to the end of the Muqata. He completely lost Jenin and Nablus. Yeah. And now you want to put him in charge of managing the transition to normal life of 2 million people in the midst of ruins? It's beyond the capacity of the PA, even if there were no ideological reasons to tell them not to come.
Right. That's a very helpful analysis, given the pressures that we're under to go in exactly that direction. I think. Okay, I think we will leave it there. And thank Dr. Eran Lerman very, very much for his time, for his usual erudition and analysis. And I recommend everyone go to the JISS website, They have a great English website with a lot of great material written by Eran Lerman and others on the current situation and the wider topics like the Eastern Mediterranean that we started this lecture with. We will be back in a couple of weeks. We'll be talking about the US-Israel relationship with Eitan Gilboa, and I hope you'll join us for that. So thank you again, Eran Lerman. Thanks everyone for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you for being with us.